Well, we're back here for another classic car chat, and we have got a really beautiful car we're going to talk about today, 1966 Mustang. And with me today, I have Mr. Mustang Encyclopedia, John Wingle.
Not quite, but we'll try.
You still know a whole lot more about these ones than I do, and I was in my teenage years when they first came out, so you figure I might know.
You should know.
They were,
Do you remember where Ford introduced it?
well, 64.
Where?
Where? Oh, I know that because you've told me. At the New York World's Fair.
The New York World's Fair, correct. Yeah, at the Ford Rotunda.
I remember, I kind of remember seeing some of those promotional shots that they did with the Mustang sitting in front of the Unisphere.
Yeah, exactly. The red convertible.
Yeah.
Yep. So this one's from 1966, which is from the second full year of production. But there was a half year of production in 1964. They're commonly referred to as the 64 and a half Mustangs, but I believe Ford called them 1965s. Collectors called them 1964 and a half. And there is a couple of differences in the 64 and a half over the real production 65 that was introduced in the fall of 64. The car came out in the spring of 64. So from the spring to the fall, they were considered 64 and a half vehicles. And a couple little differences in the early to the late cars, which give them the 64 and a half designation. I believe one of them is, if I remember right, the lock knobs on the early cars are color-coded to the interior, and then the true 65s are black, or vice versa. And the passenger seat on the early cars did not move, I believe. It was stationary. And then the true 65 cars had a movable passenger side seat.
That would have made life difficult for me, because with the long legs I've got, if I had, and it was always something like that where I got scrunched up into something where my knees were underneath my chin, especially in the back seat or something like this.
Right, yeah.
Because it was hard to fit adults into the rear seat of some of these nice
cars. I mean, not too bad here. I've seen smaller back seats, especially where this is a hardtop car. You got a little bit more room than if it was a convertible. But for the size of the car, I don't think it's that bad. Of course, we know that this car is based on the Falcon. So the Ford Falcon was known to be a fairly spacious, small car. So the back seat in the Falcon's about the same as the back seat in the Mustang. And the Falcon started out as a family car.
Well, wasn't the Mustang that was originally supposed to be kind of like just a kind of a slightly classier version of the economy cars?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, they didn't want to. I don't think Ford wanted the public to necessarily know it was a gussied up Falcon. It's really not a gussied up Falcon. It's based on the Falcon platform, but a lot of obviously doesn't look at anything like a Falcon.
Nothing like that. I remember seeing some folks riding around in the neighborhood where I was living at the time, and everybody thought they were just dynamite-looking cars.
And the goal was for it to be affordable. They wanted it to be affordable. Ali Iacocca, who was the brainchild behind it, wanted it to be affordable for the average American to be able to purchase it. So on that regard, it kind of lends to the Falcon as far as affordability goes. This was an affordable little sports car. And a little known fact, and some may argue with me on this, but I'll stand my ground. Although the Mustang is sort of known as the pioneer of the pony car, there's a car that was a few years before this that actually gave Lee Iacocca the inspiration to build this car. He saw the success of that car and told his designers to go to work on this car. And that car was the Chevy Corvair.
Oh.
The Chevy Corvair Spider, the Monza Spider, the Monza convertible coupe that was introduced in late 1960. By 1962 was one of the top selling Corvairs. And its claim to fame, especially when they came along with the turbo version, the Spider, was a 4-passenger, 4-on-the-floor, affordable, fun sports car. And Lee saw the success in that car over at Chevrolet and told his designers to go to work on this. And they started with, obviously, the basis being the Falcon. And what they came out with, they knocked it out of the park. And when this car was introduced, it outsold that Corvair Spider.
What did it have under the hood for the original motor that they used?
Well, the base engine in 64, 65, I believe, was a 170 cubic inch straight six. Certainly an anemic engine that probably had about 85 horsepower or something, maybe even less.
So they probably made the original versions of this a bit lighter than...
Yeah. Then there was an optional 206, which I think became at some point the standard 6 in the Mustang. I don't know at one point. I believe the early cars you could get a 170 in, but I could be corrected on that. And then the range went up to at early cars for a V8 was a 260 V8, and then the 260 in 1965 or mid 65 turned into the 289 V8, which is what this 1966 has, the 289 V8, which is probably one of the most popular engine options for these cars, both when they were new and today. It's what people look for. We were talking earlier before you started that there was a GT version of this car as well, also with a 289 cubic inch V8, but what they call the K-Code engine, K-Code 289, high performance 289 with a 4-barrel carburetor as opposed to the 2-barrel carburetor that this has, and bigger pistons and so forth to get more horsepower out of the standard 289, like what this has in it.
And they also had the Shelby GT.
And then Shelby, I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And Shelby certainly did an awful lot to turn it into a muscle car, didn't they?
They certainly did. Certainly did. And I think he started with his version of the Mustang in 65, 66, Shelby?
We're somewhere right around
65, I think. Yeah, he got in fairly early. He had a good relationship with the Iacocca over at Ford. So, and that gave the car even more provenance. I mean, by 1966, when this car was built, Ford had sold over 1 million of these cars in just a year and a half or 2 years,
My brother-in-law had one of those Shelby GT Mustangs. He was in the Navy at the time and was stationed in Boston where he met my sister. And he pulled that thing into the driveway the first time I saw it, and I thought that was one of the coolest cars I'd ever seen.
Yeah. I wish I was alive at that time to remember these cars when they first hit the streets. You remember them. You still have memories of seeing them drive around the neighborhoods because they were so different from everything else we were used to.
Oh, yeah.
In 1964, 65.
Now, some people, depending on the color you saw coming down the road, it was either a chick car or it was a really hot car.
Well, that was another claim to fame with this car. You could build this car to suit what you wanted. It could be a sports car. It could be a small, economical, grocery getter with a little 6-cylinder and a 3-speed stick and bare bones. It could just be your grocery getter or, for a school teacher to go back and forth to work. Luxury, deluxe interior, air conditioning, power steering, 8-track player, or you could go performance with the GT and performance options. So you could really build these cars to suit your needs, which was another huge plus.
And that's one way to sell a lot more of them. If
exactly.
You can customize
you can appeal to every audience. You could with this car. Yep.
Because it was one of those things that looked like a sports car, but it also kind of looked like a family car too. Yeah. It was a nice, somewhere in the middle of the road type of thing.
But even the bread and butter car that we mentioned, the smaller engine with a 3-speed and bare bones, no options, it still was a good looking car. Yeah. Most of the time back then, if you bought a bare bones car, everybody knew, the Biscayne looked like a Biscayne, but the Mustang, even if it was the base price car with the small engine, it didn't look the part. So,
it had a unique look for it for those days.
Yes. Great lines. Yeah. Even by today's standards, I think it looks terrific.
If you want to go down a little rat hole with me.
Okay.
I was doing some research, and the first thing that came up, because when I was looking at this, I want to find out more about the hardtop convertible, which is what they used to call these things, the vinyl top, that the roof never went anywhere, but they still like to call it a convertible.
Kind of mirrored a convertible.
Because it didn't have the post in the middle.
Right. This was a hardtop style. Yeah.
And I discovered that there was a point in there where Ford wanted to do a hardtop retractable. And an engineer, designer, whose name was Ben Smith, did a design up. He said, okay, we're going to do it like this, this, and this. And they didn't put a motor in it to move the roof around. They had it. He had it all set up. So it only took 11 pounds of force to put that
manually
put it back into the trunk. The trunk hood lifted up from the front end of it, and the car went down. It had the roof split in the middle and folded in half. It was because he was the guy that designed the roof for the Skyliner.
Yeah, the Galaxy Skyliner. Yeah.
And I mean, I was looking at the
Very
video of
similar
that.
setup.
There was only about this much of that Skyliner roof that actually folded under.
It had a bigger deck.
And the funny thing is, you see all these things where the roof just goes like this and lays down into the trunk. And that one picked it up and put it down with the roof right side up.
Right side up.
Which meant if you wanted to put some luggage in, you put it in underneath and you could put the roof over on top of it and you had storage space.
Right. Just couldn't get to it when the roof was down.
No, well, but the ride to wherever you were going was nice.
Pretty cool, yeah. And those were powered.
Yeah. And Ford said, we want a powered roof. And Smith was adamant about not doing it.
On the Mustang?
On the Mustang. And his service term at Ford was up the next year. And he went back several years later wanting to get all of his documentation on what he did with the design on it. And where Ford was the most documented, the Mustang was the most documented car they'd ever built. They had every scrap of paper except the work that he did on it. And he couldn't find it anywhere. He eventually redesigned it and started selling it as an aftermarket thing, initially for the 66s in 93 or somewhere around there.
I think I've seen one. I think I've seen one at a car show.
I have found all kinds of little goodies. There is one video clip that I have that will be running when we start talking about this that seems to be a guy that was talking to Ben's son Dave, because he was in on the aftermarket part of that thing. The father and son went into the business together, and he was showing off his first prototype of the car. Oh. And it was, that you undid the thing, and it was almost like one finger was all it took to push it back into the trunk.
Wow, that's great.
It was
so
know. Well balanced, and they had the spring pistons and things like that, so that a lot of the weight was handled by the car. But it was just a beautiful thing to watch. Two kids sitting in the back seat playing video games. They wouldn't even notice that the roof was gone. Backed in, back out, and it was just wonderful.
Did they mention why Ford decided not to put it into production? They already had a soft top convertible, so they probably figured it was redundant.
Well, the thing, I don't know, because Ford wanted to do the powered version of the retractable, and I think that was the whole thing. Was Ben Smith wanted to do it without being powered because it was so easy to do and it would keep the cost down, I'm sure.
Right.
And they wanted to do that because their research said people wanted a powered retractable roof. So,
interesting. I have seen, I think, one of those over the years at a car show locally, but I never really knew the true story behind them. I just assumed it was some dude that came up with his own and built it. But I didn't realize it had a Ford heritage to it, a small Ford heritage.
Well, other people have done the same thing. They've aftermarketed that exact same design with just enough minor detail differences so that they wouldn't get hit with a suit for copyright infringement from Ben Smith.
He may even have a patent on it or something. Yeah.
And it's just funny that they all look the same when they get going, and some of the dealers out there that are selling cars, these older Mustangs with that roof, because it never went into production, they say, well, this is only one of the few prototypes that they ever built, and they never built the prototype.
Yeah, a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, a little bit of a stretch there.
Yeah.
Because if they've got the roof there, it was probably the aftermarket thing that Ben Smith was selling in the 90s.
In the 90s, yeah. A little bit of a stretch there.
Well, let's get back into talking about the Mustang as a whole now. Mm-hmm. We've been long enough down on this rat hole.
Yeah.
Except I can throw one more thing at that. I just thought it was so funny. There's a guy who did a video for YouTube, had his Mustang sitting in the driveway, fastback, but it was a removable fastback. And he took it off, got back in the car, and put the convertible up, which was underneath the
So he had a fastback and a convertible Mustang.
Yes, it was like two cars in one.
I love that. Must have been
aftermarket. What a beautiful
fiberglass
thing.
makeup, mock-up of the fastback. That's great. I'd like to see that. Before I forget, people love the color of this, and they always ask what the color is. Ford called this Tahoe turquoise, which to me is a perfect color for a mid-60s Mustang.
Yeah.
Especially mated with the two-tone turquoise and white deluxe interior. Ford called this a deluxe interior. It was an optional interior, commonly referred to as pony interior. Ford never really called it pony interior. They called it a deluxe interior or an interior decor option or something like that. But the reason why it got its name to be a pony interior is because it's embossed galloping ponies on the backs of all Fords.
It was the
so people call
second color insert part of that too?
Yeah, and people called it pony interior, but little known fact, Ford never called it pony interior. They called it deluxe interior or interior decor option of some sort.
Well, maybe that was why somebody came up with the Dance the Pony about the same time.
Yeah. This particular car sold new in Pasadena, California. We got all the original paperwork, which is great. Early Mustangs, unfortunately, were known to rust. That was one of their biggest downfalls, especially in this part of the country. They sort of got a nickname, Rustang. This never was a Rustang. This spent almost its entire life in Southern California, leaving California in 2014 to go to Louisiana before coming to Massachusetts. So although this car was lately restored with a new paint, interior, and a vinyl roof, the car was never rusted. So this is all the original sheet metal, which is almost unheard of on one of these cars because they were known to rust, as were many cars from that generation.
Yeah, well,
the metal wasn't treated.
Almost anything you got around up here for a car would rust out eventually.
Within a few years, yeah.
It always started down at the rocker panels because they had all that ice coming up off the road from the wheels.
The floorboards, and these are unibody. There's no frame under this car. It's unibody construction. So once you start losing structural integrity, floorboards and rails and things, the car would some of them would literally, the convertible versions would start to fold in half. You couldn't open the doors.
Oh, really?
Because the top gave it its last bit of rigidity. So if it was a convertible and didn't have a hard top, I've seen them in junkyards where they've literally folded in half and the door is unable to be opened or closed because they've given up the ghost to Mother Nature. Still around today, the Mustang, one of the longest running nameplates in automotive history. We've got one of its younger brothers over here to our left, the 1989 version, Mustang GT. And the new one still sells and they even have an electric version now called the Mustang E, which caused quite the controversy to true Mustang enthusiasts that felt it was the wrong name for the car. That's progress for you.
It had the same styling, so what else are they going to do?
It has some of the same styling, yeah. But alongside that, they still build the gas-powered Mustang coupes, convertibles, GTs. It's still just as popular today as it's ever been. It's just really a nameplate with serious longevity. I hope they never give it up.
And there are people who are making aftermarket things like retractable roofs now for the brand new ones.
For the new ones, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. The Mustang wasn't always highly regarded. There was a generation of these that sort of got a bum rap, still do today, the Mustang II.
As a matter of fact, that was the time, wasn't it, when people thought that Ford was trying to kill the Mustang? Did they actually try and do that?
So that's a different story. That came out later. That was later. I'll get to that briefly after. So the Mustang II was also Lee Iacocca's idea. He wrote in his book later that he wrote in the 80s that it was the right car for the right time, and he stood by his choice. And it did sell really well, the Mustang II. But it was not, it didn't please a lot of people that were prior Mustang owners, Mustang enthusiasts. They thought they were sort of giving it up, But it was we were also having an oil crisis at the time, and we needed more, people wanted smaller, more economical cars. You'd get a 4-cylinder in the Mustang II.
Yeah. And I remember the rear end. So good. I remember the rear end logo on those. It had the Roman numeral 2 with the Mustang on top of it.
The galloping Mustang. So I think what you were referring to would have been like the late 1980s.
That could be, because it's one of those things that people they said, well, he's trying to kill the Mustang again, was what some people were saying.
Yeah, and it almost did. Well, the nameplate was going to last, but it was really not going to be anything like what it had been in the past. If you remember the Ford Probe that was introduced in the late 1980s, 1988 maybe, which was based on a Mazda. Ford and Mazda were actually in bed with each other at that point. And the Ford Probe, I think, is a platform, a Mazda platform, Mazda 6 something, I don't know.
That seems to be what I remember hearing.
That Probe, which was a front-wheel drive V6 reskinned Mazda, was going to be the Mustang. They were going to do away with the V8 rear-wheel drive configuration the Mustang had for forever, and they were going to replace the Mustang, traditional Mustang, with the Probe body style, and they're going to call the Probe the Mustang.
Yeah.
And there was such an outcry, Ford changed their mind, and they continued on with the V8 rear-wheel drive versions, the Fox body Mustang, and also built and sold the Probe under the Probe name. So the Probe almost became the Mustang.
Yeah, I remember that because I was doing cable cars at the time when that Probe came out.
I remember cable
and we did an interview with one of the automotive columnists from the Globe, who talked about, it being on the Mazda platform, and he says, "I really like that because it has that kind of melted beam look, because it was a really gradual."
It was sleek. Yep.
And it also had, where the front struts or shock absorbers, whichever that was in there, they had a little bump on the top of because they had that big thing.
And they wanted the low front end. Yes. They wanted that low sloping front end, but they had to make adjustments for the struts. Yeah. The Probe was fairly short-lived. And yet the Mustang is still with us.
The Mustang is still with us.
But when most people think Mustang, this is what comes to mind. That first generation, 64.5 to 66. 67, they did a slight restyle, which lasted through 68. And then 69, the car got bigger and lost most of its original design cues, but was still a popular car. It got a little bigger again, I think, in 1971. Which lasted through 73. Those cars also didn't get a whole lot of respect for a long period of time, but are starting to come around now. And then, of course, 74 brought the Mustang, too. Fox body came out in 1979. Yeah, 1979 Mustang was the first Fox body Mustang, which lasted until 1993, I believe, when it was, again, replaced in 94. And just different versions of that platform have evolved to what we have today, which is a sharp car. I like the new ones a lot.
Yeah, I do remember not too long ago they came out with a new Ford, a new Mustang that was had a huge engine. It was like an 800 cubic inch or something.
I know. You're gonna make me try to remember what it is.
I remember because I first saw it on Jay Leno's garage.
GT50 or something like
that.
They
brought one out for Jay to take around the test track.
Yeah.
And he was making some pretty good MPH with that thing. It was going fast.
Yeah. It's amazing. It was kind of nice that the American car companies brought some performance back, because for a long time that was gone, And Chrysler kind of inspired it with the Dodge Challenger and Charger, and they hit that out of the park with their retro design of that. I still think it's a good-looking car. And then the Mustang, of course, needed to compete with those, and they started the horsepower wars were back.
Yeah,
like they were in the '60s. Dodge, Chrysler, Ford, and GM competing for the win the race on Sunday, sell a car on Monday type of thing. And it seemed like it felt like it was back.
Yeah, well, the stock car has become a really big thing now. I mean, it's more popular than it's ever been.
Right.
And if you want to have a stock car to race in something, you want to have something like that, where you can take it right off the showroom floor and put it in the race.
Yeah, exactly. You could buy it from the showroom and race it the next day. I know that Dodge offered race-ready cars right from the factory that could be sold to the retail public. Limited amount, but they did offer them. And Ford, I'm sure, did the same thing with that Mustang, like what they had Jay Leno drive.
Yeah, because and
GM maybe with the Camaro,
I remember, hearing a lot about kids racing, late at night on open roads with those early Camaros and the Mustangs,
the Mustangs,
that were at the time.
yeah.
Anything else that they could get where they could put that pedal to the metal and get themselves 120 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So can we, since we talked about the engine, why don't we open up the...
I'm going to let you do that. So, because as I said, my back is a little sore today. I think it's right under the grill on the bottom. I think it's
under the grill?
It's under there, I believe.
What? Oh, there we go. I got it. I found it. Hallelujah.
There we go.
I actually found something. The last time I tried to do that, I never did find the latch on it. That's a beautiful looking.
So that's the standard 289 V8, which would have been the standard V8 for this car.
Yeah, and it even says it right there.
Yep, 289 cubic inches. I believe it's an A code 289, which would have been the base 289 2-barrel carburetor. The K code would have had the 4-barrel carburetor. The GT would have come equipped with. Yeah, this car's got dealer installed when it was new. We've got the original paperwork to prove it. Air conditioning.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's the condenser right there.
The compressor. Yeah,
the compressor.
Which is like a World War II bomb.
Yeah.
And that is a Ford. That is a Ford system that was installed in the car when it was new at the dealership, as noted on the original bill of sale. The customer wanted it added.
Was the AC available on the earlier versions too?
Okay. Right at 64.5. You could buy one from the factory with air. It would have had that compressor, and if you look inside, the unit that blew the air hangs under the dash, which looks aftermarket. It wasn't an in-dash vented system until 1967. 64.5 through 66 got that goofy-looking, awkward under-dash mounted unit that looked like something you had installed at Sears, but in fact was Ford correct.
Well, I can understand that because that's the way they put AC in the cars when it was an aftermarket
right.
thing.
So
why not keep it the same way? People know what it is.
Yep, exactly. You could bring your car, any car, to your local Sears service department, and they would add air conditioning into it for you. And it was always a clunky under dash unit that hung under the dash, and they plumbed it through with a compressor and a condenser, and you were down the road. Not uncommon to be done back then. The air conditioning from the factory was sort of uncommon. You know, very few cars were built at the factory with AC. It was kind of a luxury, even then, for people to justify the cost.
Yeah.
You know, it might have been I don't know what the option, maybe $400 or $480 option on this car when it was new, but that's a lot of money then. So people didn't opt for it. This car was sold in Southern California, so apparently the gentleman that bought it knew.
Well, Southern California, I mean, you're getting some pretty hot weather.
Right. That's probably why he had them added at the dealership, but it wasn't ordered from the factory with it. Same with the vinyl top on this car. It was added at the dealership. He had the air conditioning and the vinyl top added. Everything else is factory correct.
I can understand that too. You want to have a light colored roof on there to reflect the heat back off.
But both those options were also available from the factory. You could get a vinyl roof from the factory as well as the air conditioning, or your dealer could install them. Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah. Now, there's another thing I just want to get some information from you. The grill, they change that almost every year, so people would know what they were getting. And this was the 65 was with the vertical, the horizontal bars here.
Yeah, 65 would have had a chrome bar running from the galloping pony to the edge on both sides.
With a little one up coming up.
Yep, I believe so.
It looked like crosshairs.
Looked like crosshairs, yeah.
And didn't the original one have like a honeycomb? Or was that
I believe so. And then the GT version, I believe, might have been a honeycomb, because if you got a GT, you got fog lights here, which were really cool looking. And I believe you got the honeycomb grill on the GT as well, but don't quote me on that. This is specific for the 66. This was the standard grill for 66, which I think is the best. It's clean. Just a single galloping pony with no distractions. Funny, you could also at your dealership, if you wanted to, one of the options you could have the dealer install was a lighted pony. So this would light up.
That was funny because I never knew that.
You could buy that at the dealer. I think I've only ever seen one.
Yeah.
Kind of a quirky thing most people probably didn't want to spend the money for. But you could replace this with a light up one, so it lit with the headlights.
That would have attracted attention coming down the road on the dark night.
Yeah, I just happened to think of that.
And they also did the same thing. The gas cap on the rear. They changed that.
They changed
every year.
And I think now that you mention it, and again, I could be wrong, I think that's another distinction between the 64.5 and the 65. I think there's some little difference in the gas cap.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, on the 66, from what I saw today, it was kind of like a knurled edge around it.
And it's all brushed.
Yeah.
The face of it's all like a brushed aluminum, whereas the 64.5 and 5s have a black face with the pony.
Yeah, they had like a little
for grabbing the spin. Yeah. And while we're talking about gas, the floor, and same in the Falcon and in the Comet, the floor of the trunk is literally the top of the gas tank. So when you pull back the mat, the thin rubber, mat for the trunk, you're looking at the top of the gas tank. There was nothing between your luggage and the gas tank. It was your luggage sat on the gas tank.
Yeah, you didn't want to be putting anything sharp in the trunk and puncture that gas tank.
Yeah. Yep. But it worked. And no, these aren't the cars that got in trouble for back-end collisions with explosions. That was a different Ford.
Yes, as a matter of fact,
that came out a little bit later.
Yeah,
but some people think it's these.
That horse name was still involved.
Still use the horse name. We won't talk about that today. Maybe another day. Maybe we'll have one here someday and we can talk about that.
Yeah, because those disappeared fairly quickly too. They were popular for a few years.
Yeah.
But when they left, they really left
They
quickly.
kind of, 1980, actually. They went till 1980 with that car.
Wow.
We may as well tell them. It's the Pinto.
Yeah. And there's still another horse that they did, in between the Pinto and this one, which was the Maverick.
The Maverick. Yep.
Which was one of those things that I always thought it was hilarious because they said the transmission was an automatic standard transmission, which meant there was no clutch in it, but it would still, if you put it in, because I knew somebody that had one, and the gear shifts went 1, 2, 3 on it for the forward gears.
Yep.
You didn't have to start it off in 1 and go to 2 and 3. You could start it off in 3. It just might be a little bit slower on the uptake.
Yeah, sure it would be, yeah.
But it was a lot easier for people to remember to do it that way. And they didn't have to worry about the clutch.
Right.
And it wasn't a bad little car. It was in the economy. That one was a real economy.
Yeah, those cars they're just very plain. Even today, they don't do much for me. A Pinto I love. I love to see a Pinto today. I'd own one in a minute. But the Maverick just never called to me. To me, it's like what you said. It was just a true bread and butter economy car that didn't have any real draw. Yeah, I think that's my opinion.
Well, they were supposedly styling a little bit like the Mustang because it was keeping a horse name to go with it.
They did have a performance model of the Maverick too called the Grabber. A 302 V8 from the factory, stripe package. That was actually a sharp little car, the Maverick Grabber. But we're talking about Mustangs today, right? We're getting off key.
Well, we have to go down a rat hole every now and then.
Right, yeah.
They're a lot shorter now than when I was talking about the retractable roof. See, we're going down that rat hole again.
So, very clean engine bay in this car, nicely maintained. These cars will always have a following. As some cars sort of fall out of favor as they get older. I think we've talked about that before. Generations pass on. New breeds of collectors enter the market that are younger. We buy the cars that we remember our parents and our grandparents having. And there are certain generations of cars, sadly, that are kind of losing ground because that generation that would remember that car is no longer with us. These cars, I believe, even after these cars will just never age because they're so iconic that even if you were born long after these cars, this generation was on the road, everybody knows it and everybody loves it. I don't think the Mustang's ever going to falter in value as other cars, maybe from the same vintage, will. Yeah. It's just so iconic,
And it's still going strong.
Going strong.
It's been 80 years now.
Yeah.
That's 60 years.
60. Yeah. You're aging yourself there.
Well, math and me didn't always get along.
Myself too. I had to think about it for a second too, but I'm thinking I don't think it's 80.
Yeah.
So
because I remember these from my teenager years, and I'd have to be a hell of a lot older than 80.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're aging yourself.
Actually, I'm boasting for being older than I actually am.
The other thing about these cars is they were very easy to modify. So it's not uncommon to find one today that's been highly modified. They were just easy platforms to do what you wanted. If you bought one of these used in the 70s for a couple $100, you could do whatever you wanted to it, put whatever motor you wanted in it. The options were endless, you know. So you can see them today with much bigger engines in them and turned into race cars, and even building them the way Ford didn't, to make them even faster than Ford made them, you know, if you can believe that.
That is it. That is a beautiful
just very clean lines. They just really knocked it out of the park with this car. Just so iconic, you know. It's, as I say to people all the time, they're about as American as apple pie to me.
Yeah. So. And it's, you know, something that's lasted this long.
Yeah,
it really is. And because, you know, there are a few others that like this that have been around that long, you know, like the Corvette.
Although it doesn't look, you're right.
It doesn't look anything like it used to. I mean, it's just had such great changes over the years.
Right.
But the name is still there.
And the Mustang, they still, even with the brand new ones, try to keep some styling cues back to the original, like with the taillights.
Well, because they found out the hard way that every time they changed one of these iconic things that they designed into it, people just complain and they don't buy as many of them.
Right.
So they want to get the sales up. They got to keep some of those iconic figures that are what people are looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, have we exhausted ourselves on this?
I think so. I think so. I think we've pretty much solved the world's problems and told everybody about the Mustang. Not quite.
Well, you know. Well, I guess that's Classic Car Chat for today. We had a great time talking about the Mustang. We're going to have a few more because he's still got some cars in here that are worthwhile talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll have some surprises to go with them.
Good.
So, well, thanks a lot, John. And
thanks for coming.
Come see us again for the next show, Classic Car Chat. We'll see you then.